Today is the 1st of November 2025, and we are gathered here today for the 206th session of Mindfulness for Beginners in English, conducted by Nissarana Vanaya. I would like to welcome Venerable Homagaba Dhamma Kusala Thero for this session, and everyone who's joining with us today, and anyone who may be watching later on a recorded session. Our program will commence as usual with the in-session practice of mindfulness. This will be followed by the talk from Bhante on today's topic. The topic is a continuation from last week on conformity. Finally, we will be moving on to any reports, and if we have time at the end, we will be moving on to questions. To begin this session, I now invite Bhante to start the in-session practice of mindfulness. Over to you, Bhante.
Thanks, Sonali. Hello, everyone. So today we get few minutes of time to do a practical session, and probably we can do a walk-in session today. For this, you have to select some space where you are able to walk back and forth. And in this space, you walk comfortably, natural rhythm, and you can direct your eyes towards the floor in front of you, probably like 6-7 feet ahead of you. You can direct your eyes, and that way you walk in a comfortable manner. And while walking, you try to be mindful of your steps. You see things, you hear sounds, various thoughts, memories come to your mind. But among these things, you try to continue with the awareness or with the mindfulness of your steps. And time to time, when the attention goes away, you can catch it and you can simply return back to the walking sensations. So that way, let's take about 10-15 minutes to do a walking session, and when you hear the bell sound, you can return back to your seats. Okay, everyone. So that's it for today's walking session. This is about 10-15 minutes of walking just to give you an idea so you can practice on your own. Sonali, you can take over.
Thank you, Bhante. Next on the agenda is our talk on today's topic. The topic is conformity. We have started it last week and we will continue with the same topic this week as well. I now invite Bhante again to start the talk on today's topic.
Hello, everyone. So this is a continuation from last time, and we can take some time today as well to discuss this. Now, when we think about the topic conformity, you can see a lot of research behind this. If you go on YouTube or if you search on internet, you can find a lot of research that's done on the topic. And one of the famous research on conformity is called ash line experiment. They are a simple task. You have to match two lines that are in equal length, right? So the crowd, they are actors, and there is a one person who doesn't know this surrounding. Like that person, he doesn't know that the rest of the crowd, they're actors, right? So what they simply do, initially they build trust by selecting correct answers. Then towards the middle of the experiment, these paid actors, they start picking a wrong answer. And you can see the pressure building when the group is selecting a wrong answer as the correct one. The subject of the experiment, he or she looking around to see what is happening. You can see the pressure building to confirm with the group, right? So initially, for a chance or two, they might start telling the correct answer. But when you do it for a few times, you can clearly see the subject of the experiment. He or she will start confirming with the rest of the group, right? So this is one of the famous experiments done on conformity, and it is called ash line experiment. Similar type of other experiments are done, how this peer pressure, how this desire to fit in will influence us. Especially when we are in a crowd, we follow the masses. We have this desire to fit in. You don't like to be the black sheep. If you be the black sheep, then you are noticeable. The rest of the group are looking at you. So you can see there's a pressure building, right? So you might feel that this is a worldly topic when we think about the topic conformity. But in our lives, most of the time, we are following the masses. Without us knowing, there's this desire to fit in. There's this desire to follow the masses. And when you follow the masses, when you follow the herd, you are assured that they are heading in the wrong direction. So that's what the weekly topic or the quote that we have selected. It's a quote from Mark Twain, and he says, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. Because whenever you find yourself of the side of the majority, that it is most probable that you are in the wrong side. Right? So that's the topic or the idea for the week. And last time also we discussed certain aspects. And today I would like to take you towards a different direction, which will more align with the practice that we are doing. Now, let's say there's this Zen concept that talks about an incomplete circle. In Japanese, they call it enzo. It's a circle, but the ends of the circle, it is not connected. So you can see an arc on one side, then the other side, there's this opening. It is called incomplete circle in Zen, right? Enso. So this, let's say, when you draw a circle, right, there's this urge to complete the rest of it. We don't like imperfections in our life, right? So if you start drawing a circle, you have to finish it. If you keep it open, then somebody else might come and finish it. Even at homes, you can see this happening, right? When you leave something incomplete, the others, they don't like it, especially people with OCD tendencies. They start to struggle. They become anxious because this is incomplete, right? So you can see this happening. It's a funny thing in a way. There's this urge to complete it, right? But in reality, when we think about the reality, you can't always explain it. You can't fully explain it. You can explain a certain aspect of it, but the rest you have to understand by experiencing. That's the nature of this world. No matter how much you try, still there'll be a gap. When you communicate something to a person, you can really experience this. No matter how much you try, no matter how effective your communication is, still there's a gap. You communicate your message, but what is delivered is different. Right? If you are successful in communication, if you are effective, then you can probably communicate like 30-40% of the message, but still remaining 60-70%. It is up to the other person to grasp it. Right? So even in communication, even in other things, you can see no matter how much you try, there'll be always this gap. That's the nature. That's the reality that we live in. Same goes for the practice. Same goes for the meditation. Same goes for the Dhamma. Even Buddha, in his initial stages, he thought not to teach this. In his mind, he was reflecting, thinking, whatever I realized, it's difficult to explain to somebody else. And if I try explaining this, then it'll be a hell of a task. I'll have to go through a lot of trouble in order to communicate this to the other people. Right? That was Buddha's thought. But somehow, at the end of the day, it's like when a flower blooms, naturally you can feel it to the surroundings. When a flower blooms, the fragrance, they are spread to the surrounding naturally. Similarly, Buddha took his chances with the teaching, and somehow he was able to communicate this to many people, many beings, right? So when you think about the practice, when you think about meditation, we gather here every week and we try to explain the path. Not only me, even the people who are sharing their experiences, people who are adding their remarks or comments, right? We all try to communicate the practice. As a group, we try to communicate to each other. But are we successful in communicating? That's a question. Maybe for 10-20% we are successful, but the remaining 80% or so, the other person will have to practice and grasp it. That's the very idea. Because, even in the practice of Dhamma, we can see this incomplete circle effect, right? No matter how much you try, you can explain that arc, which is the part of the circle that is drawn. But the remaining part, you will always have to keep it open for the practitioner to do it and realize, right? So that's the very idea. So when we think about the circle that is drawn, or the part or the arc that is drawn, that is more like conformity. Even in the practice of Dhamma, we have this following the masses, right? Fit in with the group. When we probably not the worldly following, instead you try to follow a group of meditators. You try to follow a group of practitioners. You try to follow the Buddha's teaching. That way we try to fit in with a group of people who are following the practice, right? So when we think about that circle, the arc that is drawn, that is more like the conformity. What is behind it, right? Maybe we have certain rules that we try to follow, right? For example, 5 precepts. You try to follow 5 precepts in your life. Even in a lay life, you can try and do it, right? So following 5 precepts, it's like aligning yourself with the teaching, aligning yourself with the Buddha's guidelines. Then when it comes to a monastery like this, we have certain guidelines. We have a timetable that is recommended for the yogis who are residential. So that timetable is basically aligning with the group. Conformity in effect, right? So that way you can see, even when it comes to the practice of Dhamma, you can see certain things that we follow as a group. That circle, part of it is drawn. There's an arc that is drawn, right? That drawn part, that arc is more like conformity with the group. So you have certain rules like precepts, things like that. Then you have rites and rituals that we follow. Then maybe text that contains Buddha's teaching. Even certain guidelines about the practice. For example, let's say if there's a newcomer here, they will hear the guidelines about the practice and they will start practicing based on that. They will start following that, right? So you can see, even when it comes to the practice of Dhamma, there's a certain part of it that we have to follow according to the guidelines. We have to follow according to the group, right? So you can, even that part is there, even when it comes to the practice of Dhamma. And the other side, the side that is open, the side that is not defined, what does it represent? And when we think about that side, we can see maybe like direct experience in your meditation, right? That is not properly defined, that you have to jump into the water and experience it, right? So your meditative experience would be a part that represent the open side of the circle. Even the practice, it talks about liberation from rigid beliefs. It talks about liberation from social structure. It talks about liberation from ideologies. So when we think about those things, it is simply not following the masses. You try to liberate yourself from this social structure. You try to liberate yourself from the rigid beliefs, right? So that way, you can see even in the practice of Dhamma, we can show two sides. One side, it will represent following the masses, following the rites and rituals, following the rules, following the text that is given to us, right? So it represents aligning with the group, following the meditative group, right? But the open side of the circle, the Enso circle, it represents not aligning yourself with the masses. It represents the practical experience that you will get through the practice of meditation. It represents liberation from certain ideologies or rigid beliefs. It represents liberation from the social structure, right? So that way, even in the path of the Dhamma, you can see these two sides. These two sides, we are usually seeing it in the outside world, but even in the practice, you can separate it. You can separate it according to the circle that is incomplete circle in Zen. And you have to balance both these sides. Some people, they would say, I don't have a need to follow the masses. Some people, they would argue, I don't have to follow these rules. I don't have to follow these rites and rituals. I am not following the text. That way, some people would argue. They would try to reject the aligning with the masses, and they would try to find only the liberation part. But that's not how it works. You have to balance these two sides. Especially when we are with a group, we have to align ourselves to the norms of the group. Right? Otherwise, you will harm somebody else in your actions. That's not acceptable. Right? Coming to a meditation center and singing wouldn't be acceptable. Right? So those things, you have to follow certain rules. Although it is conformity in action, that's important. Otherwise, how can we find liberation? Right? So that part is also important. Then some people, they would try to argue, they would try to reject the open end of the circle. they would say, I don't need liberation. I don't need practice of Dhamma. I will only follow the rules. I will only follow the masses. I will only follow the text. I will only follow the rites and rituals. That way, some people might think, they might argue, right? So that's basically following the herd. Nowadays, you can see this in action, especially during this month, right? Katina ceremonies, they are everywhere. You escape yourself into a Western country, still you find Katina ceremonies, right? And most of the first generation or the second generation children, they know the temple as Katina ceremonies. And some of the kids, they are calling it black magic, right? I met certain Canadian kids and they say it's black magic because you only follow the rites and rituals. You only follow the ceremonies, right? But there is much deeper teachings from Buddha. Buddha talks about liberation. Buddha talks about liberating yourself from the social structures, liberating yourself from this, conformity. But if you don't talk about that part, if you don't know that part, then you are simply following the masses. Right? That is happening everywhere in the world. According to our knowledge, this is the only place in the world that doesn't have Katina ceremonies. Nissarana. That's the only place according to our knowledge. Right? Otherwise, you need it. You have to make sure that the temple is supported for the year. So you do these ceremonies. You have to make sure that, you show some colors to the village. You do these ceremonies. You take the loudest loudspeakers and you somehow try to show the world that we are doing something. Right? So that's basically, if you do that part only, what happens is that you simply follow the masses. You are simply following the rites and rituals. That's all you know. So these people, they align themselves with the closed side of the circle. They only know the closed side of the circle. They don't care. They don't want to go to the other side. Right? But when it comes through practice, you have to understand both these sides. You have to understand rules, you have to understand rites and rituals, you have to understand the text a little, you have to get certain guidelines on the practice. That part is necessary. Then again, in your practice, you try to experience the open end of the circle, the unknown part. That part nobody else can teach you. Even Buddha can't do it. Buddha says, Akataro Tathagato. Buddhas are showing the path. You yourself will have to walk on it. That's the very idea. So, in your practice, you have to experience this open end, the unknown part. That part is difficult. That part is difficult to understand. But time after time, we sit in our meditation, we walk in our meditation, we somehow gather certain number of meditation hours, and in the process, we get to experience this open end. You come back, you have to discuss your experience, you present your meditation reports, actively participate in the discussion. That way, you get the support of the closed end of the circle. You get that support. Again, you go to that open end. Again, you go to that unknown part of the circle. Right? So that way, time after time, you come to the structure. You come to the closed end of the circle. Again and again, you go to the unknown the open end of the circle. This way, we try to develop both ends of the circle, right? In a way, we are conforming ourselves with certain things. In a way, we are practicing non-conformity, right? Both these things we are practicing in the path. And when it comes to the idea of self, forget about the outside world, forget about the conformity in the outside world. But when it comes to the idea of self, that is basically deep psychological conformity. In our psyche, we conform ourselves to a self. And that becomes our foundation. That's how we function. Right? You use this as your foundation. You use this conformity as your foundation. And you function. Right? So in the path of the Dhamma, we try to address the greatest of all the conformity. What is the greatest of all the conformity? Basically, the illusion of self. We have been conforming ourselves for a long time with the illusion of self. But in the path of the practice, you try to challenge it. In a way, you try to investigate it, whether this conformity is correct, whether the illusion of self is really an illusion. Right? So that is the deeper experience or deeper path of the meditative practice that we are doing. Initially, you start with a little practice, but gradually, in time, when you continue your practice, you really try to challenge the greatest conformity that's out there. Right? It is the very conformity that's within you. The deep psychological conformity to a self. Right? And when it comes to Buddhist, let's say, they have this mantra, something like a mantra. They always say non-self. That's their mantra. They keep saying there is no self in this. They read the text and they try to make that statement. Even I remember I met a foreign lady. She was from Germany and she went around the country for like 3 weeks. And on the way to the airport, she came here and was introducing herself saying, Bhante, I am a high school teacher from Germany and I am devoted to Buddhism. I went around the country getting to know different teachers, different practices. And in the process, I got to know a lot of information about the practice of Dhamma. And in her statement, in her opening statement, she said, now I am experiencing the non-self nature within me. That was her opening statement. But I had to tell her, you don't start with that. You don't say, I experience non-self nature within me. That's not the correct way. Instead, you investigate if there is a self, where is it? That's the whole investigation. That's the whole self-observation that we do. Right? We don't directly say that there is no self. Right? It sounds like a buzzword. It sounds like a mantra. But that's not accurate. Instead, you investigate if there is a self, where is it? Not just once, not just twice. Instead, for years on end, you have to investigate this. Because for eons, you have been following that illusion. So don't try to, argue yourself out of the self. That's not effective. That's not going to work. Instead, the very self is arguing, telling that there is no self. You are supporting the very self by saying non-self. Right? So instead, what we do is, let's assume there is a self. Where is it? Is it in my thoughts? Is it in my emotions? Is it in my body? That way you keep observing. You continue with your mindfulness. For days you continue. For weeks you continue. For months you continue. For years you continue. That type of observation is more accurate, aligning with the practice. Otherwise you directly make the statement saying no self. But in the process, the very self is making that statement. The very self is arguing, giving all the facts, trying to prove to other people that there is no self. That's not going to work. What we have to do is simply experience this in the practice of meditation. I remember one time somebody was saying, Bhante, in my sitting practice, I feel peaceful. But when I go to my day-to-day work, my mind is full of chaos. In the sitting practice, maybe like for a few minutes, the mind is peaceful. When I go to my day-to-day work, my mind is all over the place, full of chaos. So that person was saying, Bhante, time after time, every day I have to go to the sitting session and let my mind experience the peaceful nature. Every day you go to your sitting session and let the mind experience the peaceful nature. In this way, when I let it experience time after time, the peace that's there, one day my mind will be peaceful even during my daily activities. So in a way, it's like, you are showing this mind that there is a greater state or there is a greater peace that it can experience. But the mind is always following the conformity. Mind doesn't want to follow the peace. Mind doesn't want to follow the nibbana. Mind will always align with the conformity. Mind will always align with the world. Right? So one time you show it that there is peace, it won't accept. 10 times you show it that there is peace, still it won't accept. 100 times you show it that there is peace, still it won't accept. But time after time, repetitively, maybe 1,000 times, maybe 10,000 times, maybe 100,000 times, you show the mind that there is a greater state, a greater peace that's available. And when you show it repetitively, one day the mind will accept that peace that was there. That's the whole process of meditation. That's the very idea. Now, since we talked about the idea of self, the greatest illusion or the greatest conformity that's available, there's this very nice encounter with Buddha. Somebody called Vachagota. He is, I think, a Brahmin. And he came to Buddha he asked a certain question. He asked, is there a self? Right? Then Buddha, he was silent. He didn't answer. Then again the Vacchagotta, he is asking, is there no self? Again the Buddha is silent. No answer. Then this Brahmin, since he didn't get an answer, he left. Once he left, Venerable Ananda was there. He was asking Buddha, Bhante, why didn't you answer that person? Then the Buddha was explaining the reasoning behind being silent. He said that if you answer the question, is there a self, then you encourage them to align with the view of eternalism. Right? If you directly answer and tell that there is a self, then of course eternalism. The soul continues. It's like changing clothes. You wear this cloth, the body, in this life. Then at the end of the life, the soul leaves your body and start wearing a fresh cloth. Right? Something like that, some similar idea. But there's this solid soul that goes life to life. Eternalism. Existence continues. Something like that. Then if you answer the question, is there no self, then that person might start following the view of nihilism. When you follow the view of nihilism, what happens is that if there is only this life, then I can do whatever and simply enjoy. I don't have to follow the rules. I don't have to follow the precepts. I don't have to earn properly. Instead, I can do whatever and simply enjoy the life that's given to me. That's all there is at the deathbed. There's no continuation. Something like that. So that view is also wrong. If you start following that view, then there is no need to gather here. You can simply go out and enjoy the Saturday, right? That's how it is, right? There's no need for the practice. There's no need to earn properly. Instead, you can rob a bank and simply enjoy that money. So that way, if you align yourself with a view like nihilism, then again there's a problem. So Buddha didn't answer those two questions. Right? Is there a self? He didn't answer. Is there a no self? He didn't answer. Right? If you go and ask the same question from a Buddhist, is there a no self? Then he would definitely say yes. There's no self. That's the mantra all the Buddhists have. But you have to understand, simply making these statements, it's not that simple. It might align you with a different view that might be harming your practice. So basically, the whole idea is to be neutral towards the existence. Right? You don't try to argue yourself saying there is a self. You don't try to argue yourself there is no self. Those two are more like extremes. Instead, the middle path would be to develop certain neutrality towards the existence. And when you practice for many years, you really get to experience this. You wake up, you go to work, you do your daily things, but you are more or less neutral towards this existence. You talk to other people, you do your daily responsibilities, you raise your children, but you are more or less neutral towards whatever you are doing. Right? That neutrality is much closer to Nibbana. You don't try to argue yourself with the extremes. You don't try to follow the conformity. Instead, you simply develop this neutrality towards the existence. And when I say develop this neutrality, it's not that simple. Instead, what you can do is simply continue your practice, gather the causes, and as a result, you will start to experience this neutrality. When you create the causes for the neutrality by being mindful, you get to experience the result. That's the very idea. So simply supporting your practice for many months, many years, you can really see you don't take these statements so seriously. You don't take your daily things so seriously. You don't take your family matters so seriously. You simply do them. You are doing them for the sake of doing. But there is no real grip. You have a certain neutrality towards this very existence. That's the middle path. That's why Buddha didn't answer those two extremist questions. Instead, he kept his silence. Thanks to Venerable Ananda, who was nearby, we got this explanation later. Right? So that's the very idea. In the process, we get to challenge the greatest conformity that's out there. Deep psychological conformity. The view of the self. The illusion of the self. Right? That's the greatest conformity that we can find. And I hope today's talk was useful to your practice. And that's it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Bhante. That was a very insightful talk on conformity. We have a lot to take home from that topic. We now move on to our reports that we have received. And before that, let me briefly run the guide. I know a lot of the people who are here are not new to meditation. However, we show this every week just so that someone can benefit, or if you want to forward it to somebody else, or if you're watching later via our YouTube or link on Nissarana Vanaya, we can always follow these guidelines. So Nissarana Vanaya has produced these two videos if you want to start mindful meditation. It is on mindful walking and mindful sitting. Once you have watched these videos, you can allocate a bit of time to do your own practice. Start with any amount of time. As Manu said last week, and Bhante always says, a few breaths of mindful is better than not doing it at all. So any amount of time to start off with, and then gradually make your way to 2 hours of each practice. Once you have some experience of your own, you can write the reflection report, and you can send it to us, and we will present it to Bhante or Manu and get the feedback that you receive to keep progressing. So when you do write the reports, please make sure that it is your own experiences. And in sitting, it would be, if you have a primary object, if you do any sensations, breathing, and things like that. And if it's walking, any the sensations of your soles, with the weight shifting from side to side, and how the legs were placed and things like that would be a good way to start. Then once you have your own experiences written down, we'd like to hear from you. There is a Google form I will put the link in a little bit on the chat, and also there is an email which is beginnersnv@gmail.com. You can use this Gmail to write to us about anything, about the session, as well as reports, as well as any topics that you'd like for us to discuss as well. And there is also all the recordings on this, but this is also live streamed to a YouTube channel, a Nissarana Vanaya, a Satipasala YouTube channel even. And it is live streamed, and it is there. If you go on the live streams, you should be able to find it as well. And if you need any help with any of this, please do ask us on the chat or on that email, beginnersnv@gmail.com, and I'll be able to help you with that. We now move on to the reports. We have received 2 reports today. I will start with the first one. It's from an adult, Venerable Swamin Wahansa. Mindful walking. Walked observing the sensations under feet. Felt hardness and roughness of the floor. Thoughts related to my classes appeared, and some phrasal verbs came and faded away. Could observe 19 footsteps in a length. Mindful sitting. Sat and observed posture as a statue. Observed belly movements and counted. Counted up to 6. Meantime, some English words appeared and disappeared in mind. Thero and Saranai Swamin Wahansa. That's the end of report, Bante.
Okay, so probably like 19 steps and 6 counts of belly movements, right? So that's for that length, you can continue your practice, and time to time various thoughts, certain words, these things appear, take you away. But that's okay. You can again return to the primary object, and you can again do 19 counts, right? Again, let's say you distracted, but again you can come and do 19 more counts. That's the very idea of the practice. I remember someone in a group that was saying, Bante, I can do only couple of breaths. That's all I can do. Then the mind gets distracted. Right? So what to tell to such a person? You have to tell them, you can do couple of breaths. That's a start. Now do many rounds of such couples. Right? That's the very idea of the practice. Otherwise, if you wish that the mind will always stay with the primary object, that is not practical. The mind will follow its tendencies, that's natural. But among those tendencies, you try to continue the practice. I participated for a session in the morning at Nissarana, and probably like 120 people or so are there for the daily retreat. Right? Some newcomers were there, and you can see they can't even keep their eyes closed. They can't even stay still for like a minute. Especially few people who wasn't comfortable in the posture. Mostly newcomers, right? So you can see every minute they are changing their posture. Every minute or every few seconds they are opening their eyes. That way they are struggling. It feels like out of the world torture. The worst thing you can do to a worldly person is simply send them to a retreat. It's like a visit to hell. Seriously. That's how it is, you somehow convince them. Even I remember I one time did. There was this person who didn't do the practice. Somehow I convinced them to come for like 3 days. Right? I was commenting about the nature, the beautiful sceneries and the waterways and everything. Right? So this person somehow came. But after spending the first night, the mind was crazy like anything. And cursing, blaming the person who convinced them to come. Right? So if you have an enemy, the best thing you can do is somehow send them to a retreat. Send them to a residential retreat, maybe like 3-4 days. And it will be one of the greatest tortures that they have experienced. It's not easy, it's real. You can see how much they are struggling. You can't help them. They just have to somehow overcome that state of mind. Right? They have to continue their practice little by little and uplift themselves from that state of mind. That's the very idea. How to uplift? Simply follow 19 counts. Every 19 counts you get distracted, but that's okay. Again you bring your attention back, again you do 19 more counts. That's the way of the practice. And when you do it for maybe like days, maybe when you do it for weeks, when you do it for months, you can see that you are uplifting this mind to a better state. That's the whole idea.
Thank you, Bhante. We have another report, again from an adult. Sitting meditation, watching breath. Noted long and short breaths which disappeared quickly. Mind went to past and future, but came back to breath soon. The breath reappeared, sleepiness arose and passed. Warm out breath and cooler in breaths noted. Felt a heartbeat with the breaths at times. Sounds heard not distracting. Thoughts distracting at times. Meditated for 40 minutes. Walking meditation. Walked on tile floor, noting sensations on soles of feet. Felt warmth and cold in parts of floor, uneven surface of tiles, hardness of floor compared to softer parts of foot. Pains in foot which pass quickly and change to another part of foot. Noted intention in mind to lift, move and place foot during some of the walking. The pace changing spontaneously. Also observed turning right at times and to left at other times. Sounds heard, not distracting. Different sensations on face and body observed to arise and pass. Walked for 1 hour. Mindfulness in the day. Despite a busy week, mind calm, mostly staying on task at hand and not doing too much to the past or future. When interacting with family members, noting less irritation when mindful, or if irritation arises, catching it as it arises. However, in unmindful moments, noting how anger arises, resulting in harsh speech or angry silence. On reflection in hindsight, noting how the sense of I or holding on to a view supports this. That's the end of report. Much gratitude to Bhante and the organizers.
Yes, so in your report you say that the sounds are not distracting, but the thoughts are distracting, right? So it's something that you can work on. In your formal practice, when thoughts come, that's where your practice should be. That's something you can improve in your practice, right? So when the thoughts come, don't try to rush yourself to the primary object. Instead, simply be with the thought for a while. Be mindful and simply stay with the thought without returning to the primary object and see what happens. And when you try to do this, sometimes the thoughts start proliferating. And if they start proliferating, and if you feel like they are not ending, then you know what to do. You can simply return to the primary object. But we don't return in a rush. Instead, we take some time with the thought and see what is happening. You don't have to do much. Simply be with the thought and see whether it is truly distracting. Whether you can continue your mindfulness among the thoughts. Let's say your breath, you are mindful. Then a thought comes. Again, after a while, you return to your breath. Can you be mindful throughout this whole process? That's the very idea. Mindfulness of breath won't be there, right? Initially, the mindfulness of breath, then mindfulness of thought, then again, the mindfulness of breath returns. So this whole cycle, whole process, can you be mindful? That way we try to approach these things differently. When you get a hold of the correct practice, you can really work on these things, especially when you mention the thoughts are distracting. That's something you can work on. Then the daily part, you can see certain emotions, certain things arising. That's natural. It takes some time to figure out the proper balance. So being unmindful, don't get discouraged. That happens. That is natural. And one important thing you mentioned, anger in silence. Right? That something happens at homes. You are silent, but you are angry. Especially probably the mothers, they do this. Yes, they are angry and they stay mute. Although they stay mute, still their minds are so loud and full of anger. Right? So these things, it's good to, observe. Sometimes you say harsh words when you're angry. Sometimes you are angry in silence. Right? Both the things represent two phases of anger. Right? So that way, we don't try to deny these emotions. These things are more like human emotions. What we do is simply observe different facets, different phases of them. That observation you can continue.
Thank you, Bhante. Now we have come to the end of the reports. We do have time for questions, and we already have one hand raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, Bhante, Avasarai. Bhante, because you said to get the support from the group, I'm at the flood stage. Bhante, there are periods of time during day-to-day activities where there are no thoughts. I'm absolutely fine. But when the floods come, the thoughts come with it and the proliferation is there. When someone criticizes the heart, that's when it really hurts the heart. Any advice that you can give is greatly appreciated.
Yes, now when you say flux, you can't separate thoughts out of it. The very word flux include everything. Thoughts too are part of it. Certain bodily sensations, sounds, even sights when you do the walking, right? It's certain emotions, pain, all those things included, a mixture of things. That's the word flux. And when you say flux, you can't filter out thoughts. Sometimes the flux becomes more thought prominent. That's fine. That happens with certain, outside situations. When you encounter certain people, certain situations, the mind or the flux becomes thought prominent, but that's okay. That's okay because the flux is flux, right? You can't filter out things. You can't say this shouldn't be there, right? The whole process we identify as flux. Simply being with it would be your practice, right? Let the thoughts come and go. Simply go with the flow. That's the very idea. When you reach such a level, especially in your statement, if you are saying flux, then you can't filter out thoughts out of it, right? And then that's the first one. Then the second part is interesting. When someone criticizes the practice, when someone criticizes the Buddha, do we get angry? That's the question that you have to ask. There's this one encounter with Buddha. Certain monks along with the Buddha was traveling on foot, and at that time you have to go through certain forest areas, certain dangerous areas. So when traveling, groups are traveling together, right? Like a caravan. So Buddha and his followers, the monks, they were traveling. Then some other teachers, followers, they were traveling. Lay people were traveling. Merchants were traveling that way, right? So in this weeks-long travel, certain monks, they experience that one of the people in the group was praising the Buddha. He was a disciple of some other teacher, and this disciple was praising the Buddha. Then the teacher was blaming the Buddha, right? Along the way, maybe like for many days, they experienced this. So finally these monks, they decide to come to Buddha and complain. Probably appreciate the disciple, saying that boy, he's nice. He's praising the Buddha, while his own teacher is blaming. So they made this statement thinking that Buddha would give some solution to this. But Buddha, in return, told them, monks, if you were happy when that person was praising the Buddha, then you are caught. If you got angry when that person was blaming the Buddha, then you are caught. You are caught in the process of samsara. You are caught in the world. Right? The world is always full of praise and blame. That's the world. So when we get happy, when we are praised, then we are caught in the world. When we get angry, when we are blamed, then again we are caught in the world. Right? So allow other people to criticize the practice. Right? And see your inner reaction. See that you are getting caught in the process time after time. You are getting caught in the world time after time. That would be your observation. So in a way, the outside people, they are helping your practice, coming to you and criticizing the very own practice that you are doing, right? You have to pay them for doing such things.
Panchani, I hope you got your answer.
Yes, Bante, I should thank them for challenging me. But over and over
Don't
again,
do,
when
you have to
it's
pay them.
over
Simply
and
thank.
over again, Bante, I'm watching. They're challenging, I'm watching, but still I'm getting caught. That's the final verdict.
Okay, so we will move on to the next person. There's another hand raised. Samantha, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you, Sonali. And thank you, Bante, for that really interesting talk on conformity as well. Funnily, recently I've been, well, a lot of time actually, this thought of the self, I've been investigating or reflecting on. And I was just thinking, what is it that makes me, think of her as a self? And recently I was just sort of like watching, obviously when my mindful was there, and I realized, from these sessions how important the first thing is to be the sati, the mindful, because usually if I'm not mindful, I'm proliferating and getting carried away in my thoughts and just like a robot. So I thank you for highlighting mindfulness, because I'm finally thinking in what exactly mindfulness is all about, why it's so important. So once when I'm in that mode of mindfulness, I realized that I'm driven by my likes and dislikes a lot. Everything is like put into that category, more or less. So if I like something, I sort of like go along with that, and if I dislike, I get all my negative reactions or things like that. So that's what's driving me in life, more or less. But I haven't actually gone deeper into it. It was just a little thing that I just noticed, and there again, I sort of like thought about it, and then I thought, well, I'm also driven by causes. I'm a process. Like if I'm like hungry, the body, that's just, I have no control of it. The hunger has come, and I had to go and do something. I had to go and eat something, and then if I have to go work, it's a process. The time I'm driven by a certain time. I had to get the train, so I had to rush off to that train, and then in the meantime, if I had to do something else, there's something else that's important, like I don't know, to give some medication to someone, I had to do that. So everything, there's a reason for doing things. So then I'm sort of thinking, what exactly am I doing out of my own will? So those two are sort of like in tangent. I'm just reflecting. So I'm just thinking, am I going in the right way of reflecting and trying to experience thinking about my feelings, being mindful of it? Does that make sense, Bante?
Yes, so thank you for sharing. Now, as you said, it's a process. Even likes and dislikes, it's a mind-made process, right? So we can identify the whole thing as a process. There's no real person in it. It's simply a process, right? Some are bodily needs, some are mind-made. You are following this process. You are going with this process, right? So the very idea of the practice is simply to be aware. We are not trying to change the process. Some people, they would argue that if I don't feed my hunger, then I'll be enlightened, right? There's this very nice story about in one of the Achancha books, a disciple of him, a monk. His roof was broken in the wind. And this monk, for months, he didn't fix the roof, and the water was pouring, and he was wet inside his kuti for months, trying to see that I won't feed this desire to be under a roof. right? And Ajahn Chai was making fun of him, saying although he was wet for months, I don't think he grew any wiser. That was the statement that Ajahn Chah made. So you can see these things you have to do. That's fine. When you're hungry, you have to feed yourself, right? But by not doing that, it won't get you closer to enlightenment, right? But the very idea of the practice is simply to be aware that this is how things are happening. Earlier you thought that there is your own will. There's a free will for you, right? You thought that you choose to feed yourself. You choose to get angry. You justified yourself giving various reasons for these things. But now it's more like weather. It's a process. It's a process. Even physical needs or the mental, both of these things are simply a process. What you do is simply to be aware of that process. This is how these things are happening. And what is free will? Right? What do we do with free will? That observation we are doing, we are keeping it open and see. If I do few days of observation, if I do few weeks of observation, if I do few months of observation, if I do few years of observation, can I come closer to the reality? That's the very idea. So good. You are on a good path. You are on a good way of practice. So continue and see how things work.
I hope your question was answered, Samantha. We now have gone over the time limit that we usually take. So I think now we will move on to ending the session. So thank you to everyone who shared your reports and asked questions as well, because it does benefit all of us at the end. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to now thank Venerable Homagama Dhamma Kusala Thero for his continued guidance on this program and continuously helping us and supporting us. We can't also forget the Chief Abbot of Nissarana Vanaya, Venerable Udayiriyagama Dhammajiva Mahathero, whose idea was to initiate this program. May they both, with this merit, improve their own practice as well. Thank you to all the organizers and everyone who's sending us reports, feedback to improve the session. And thank you to everyone who might be watching later as well. And as usual, our program will commence 1 p.m. in Sri Lankan time. We have now changed the British time and Australian time from what we can see. So please remember that and pass on the message to everyone who may have missed today's session even, that we are now 7:30 a.m. in UK time. So we will not change the time, will not change in Sri Lanka. It's 1 p.m. Sri Lankan time. So I will now end the session. May you all have a happy and mindful week ahead.